Jacob never imagined that the moment he finally laid his hands on the last link in the plasma ring would also be the moment everything he had fought to protect began collapsing at once. The investigation had already been wearing him down day after day, pushing him out of his comfort zone and forcing him to live on the fragile line between truth and deception. But only when the curtain was truly pulled back did Jacob understand that the price of getting too close to the truth had never been limited to professional danger alone. The instant Grayson was exposed as the man behind that entire dark network, everything changed in nature. It was no longer a quiet operation meant to expose a criminal enterprise. It became a cold-blooded purge, where the one in power did not merely want to eliminate an enemy, but to crush the soul of anyone bold enough to challenge him. The gunshot aimed at Jacob therefore carried a meaning far crueler than a simple attempt to silence a witness. It was a declaration that Grayson was not afraid of being exposed, did not tremble before the truth, and had no intention of stopping. He shot Jacob not only because Jacob knew too much, but because Jacob had touched the dark power Grayson had built through ambition, control, and absolute ruthlessness. Jacob's fall was not merely a physical collapse. It was the moment a man who once believed he could carry both his duty and his family was forced to realize that he had been dragged into a war where his enemy was not just after his life, but after the entire foundation of his existence. In the dizzying rush as blood and truth crashed over him at once, the deepest pain was not simply the wound tearing through his body, but the bitter realization that he had come so close to victory, only to learn that the distance between almost reaching the light and being thrown into the abyss can sometimes be no more than a single breath. For Grayson, bringing Jacob down was never enough. A man like him is never satisfied with merely removing an obstacle. He wants his enemy to watch helplessly as everything is taken from him piece by piece. He wants Jacob to lose the honor he spent his life building, the career he once considered his pride, and most painfully of all, the home he had always tried to protect, even when his own work had driven him away from it. This is where Grayson's cruelty reveals its truest form, because he understands that killing a man is not always the most devastating way to destroy him. There are forms of cruelty even more terrifying than death, forcing the victim to remain alive while watching every part of his life be slowly suffocated, twisted, and dismantled beyond repair. Ashley becomes a crucial part of that plan not because she willingly stepped into the darkness, but because Grayson saw in her the most vulnerable point through which he could wound Jacob even more deeply. The destruction he unleashes on Ashley does not come in one open attack, but through layers of subtle, patient, and poisonous control. He erodes her confidence little by little, making her question her own feelings, question her own choices, and gradually lose both her emotional anchor and her sense of direction at work. What makes Ashley's tragedy even more painful is that she does not collapse in one dramatic moment. She unravels in silence, caught in that state where she is trying to stay composed while feeling everything around her slipping out of alignment. Love is no longer a place of safety. Work is no longer something she can lean on. Trust, the very thing that once kept her standing, has been worn down so severely that even she no longer realizes when she began to change. But the most terrifying part is that Ash's collapse was never the end goal. For Grayson, it is only one step in a larger, colder, and far more selfish plan. He does not merely want to destroy, he wants to possess. When someone like Grayson moves, possession is not simply about taking a person, it is about claiming the feeling of total victory over someone else. Naomi is therefore pushed from the position of a woman standing at the edge of the storm into the central target of his obsession with power. She is no longer just Jacob's wife, nor merely a woman struggling to keep her balance amid marital strain and quiet anxiety. In Grayson's eyes, Naomi becomes the symbol of the last thing he can steal from Jacob in order to complete the ruin. If Jacob represents resistance, then Naomi represents the most private, fragile, and precious part of him. Taking Naomi, whether through psychological manipulation, control of circumstance, or forcing her into isolation, is Grayson's way of proving that he can step into another person's life, break every boundary, and leave behind a void nothing can fill. What makes the entire story so suffocating is that Naomi is not an object for anyone to claim. Yet being turned into a target wounds her in a deeply different way. She stands on the brink of losing Jacob not only because of his physical injury, but because the emotional distance between them is being stretched to its limit by this storm. She watches the man she loves sink deeper into danger while feeling Grayson's invisible hand tightening around her life. What makes it truly frightening is that she cannot easily fight back against someone who always chooses to strike through the weaknesses of others. And so the more Naomi struggles to stay clear-headed, the heavier the atmosphere around her becomes, thick with the feeling of being trapped. She is not only afraid for Jacob. She is also fighting the fear that if Jacob falls, the rest of his life will be stolen away by someone else right in front of her. Meanwhile, Elon is pushed into the most impossible position, where every choice comes at the cost of loss. He can no longer stand back and pretend that things are still under control. This explosion forces him to confront the truth that Grayson has gone far beyond the limits of a threat that can be anticipated or contained. If he remains silent, Jacob may be erased from the game both literally and figuratively, and that silence will become a form of complicity that can never be washed away. But if he takes action, Elon will have to face head-on the monster he once underestimated, a monster he failed to see as ruthless enough, mad enough, or ambitious enough. Ellen's torment, then, is not simply the choice between action and silence. It is the choice between accepting the cost of stepping in to save what remains, or continuing to hesitate and watching everything be dragged into the same abyss. The more one thinks about it, the more terrifying it becomes that Grayson does not act like a man who has lost control in a fit of rage. He grows more dangerous precisely because he controls his cruelty so well. He knows when to strike, when to step back, and when to let others believe they still have room to breathe, only so he can tighten his grip even harder in the final moment. The true explosion of this story, then, does not lie only in the gunshot that struck Jacob, but in the aftershock it unleashes. A single bullet can bring one man down, but a plan like Grayson's can cause an entire web of relationships to collapse in sequence. Love is twisted into a weapon, a career becomes leverage, marriage is pushed toward fracture, trust is hollowed out from within. And once the cracks begin to spread, the most horrifying part is that no one can say with certainty where the final limit of the disaster truly lies. Perhaps what makes this storyline so haunting is not only its darkness, but the way it touches a very real fear. People do not always fall because of a direct blow. More often, they collapse when someone strikes the things they love most. Jacob being shot is the most visible shock, but the deeper wound lies in the feeling that he could lose everything at once. Ashley being manipulated is the quieter tragedy, because the greatest destruction often begins when a person starts losing herself without even realizing it. Naomi being targeted makes the story painful in another way, because it turns love into a trophy in a filthy power game. And Elon, standing at the crossroads between action and silence, becomes the embodiment of helplessness, a feeling that can often be more tormenting than fear itself. If I were following this storyline as a viewer, I think what would trouble me most is the sense that everything is rushing toward a collapse that cannot be undone. This is not the kind of drama that erupts and then fades. It is the kind that leaves a heavy echo behind, because every character is being pushed to a point where they must pay with the deepest part of themselves. And that is exactly what makes the story so gripping, so suffocatingly compelling. We know an earthquake is coming, yet the more clearly we see it, the less we are able to look away.